from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word, another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, August 14th, 2020. We are marching very quickly to the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll talk about that at the end of the program, but we got a lot to talk about before we get there. We're going to pick up on where we left off last week on the Muslim influence in the United States. This time we're talking about the possibilities of bringing it to cabinet level in the presidential election coming. Following the money, precious metals rising. We're going to pick up the story where we began introducing this over a year ago and showing you how fast precious metals have risen in just the past 2 weeks. Silver and gold. We'll bring it into our nuggets portion to show you how important it is to understand the principle behind the silver and gold, what's taking place in the warnings that God gives us before the return of Jesus Christ. Well, we have a number of small stories and very important stories to get into first. Let's start with something of an anniversary, the 75th anniversary of the signing of the surrender of the Japanese for World War II 75 years ago. We got a little video here to play. Let's start our program, Jeff, with that video right now.
World War II in the Pacific, 4 years of bloody hell, came to an end here. September 2nd, 1945, a solemn ceremony on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. A mighty warship and a peace to celebrate. The ship was packed with hundreds of sailors, Marines, reporters, cameramen, and top military brass with legendary names: Nimitz, Halsey, Wainwright, McCain, representatives of 9 Allied nations, and Supreme Allied Commander General Douglas MacArthur. Just before 9 that morning, the Japanese representatives approached the Missouri. They boarded in silence, took their places, and the brief ceremony began.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
MacArthur was about to become the interim ruler of Japan, and the Japanese people, defeated and afraid, did not know what to expect until this moment.
I announce it my firm purpose to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance.
Justice and tolerance. With those words, one Japanese delegate later said, "The deck of the Missouri was transformed into an altar of peace." The Japanese foreign minister signed the instrument of surrender, followed by the Army Chief of Staff. General MacArthur signed. Eyewitnesses saw his hands tremble. The Allied nations signed as well, bearing witness to the end of the worst war in human history. World War II finally was over.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
At that moment, as if on cue, the sun came out, and as the Japanese departed, a stunning aerial display. More than 2,000 Allied aircraft flew in formation over the Missouri. In Washington, President Harry Truman marked the moment.
The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri.
It was no accident that the surrender took place aboard the Missouri. The ship was named for Truman's home state. The previous year, then Senator Truman watched his daughter christen the Missouri as it was launched into New York Harbor. Just weeks after the surrender, the ship was back in New York, welcomed by thousands, including President Truman. He visited the spot where the war had ended. He sat at the surrender table to sign the guest book and described it as the happiest day of his life. Today, with this plaque marking its now famous deck, the Missouri is anchored where World War II began for the United States. Mighty Mo now stands proudly and at peace at Pearl Harbor.
And so ended the war, August 15th, 75 years ago. We need to think about something here, because for 2 world wars, the greatest disasters and loss of life in human history, God says there's a 3rd one coming. But in those 2 wars, the United States drew close to God and intervened to stop the war from going on. This time, God says, because of our disobedience, this nation will not be there to stop the eternal struggle between good and evil, and Satan will prevail till Jesus Christ returns and puts everything back in place. Part of the reason that you and I have been called to be a part of this work, ushering in the return of Jesus Christ. All right, so now let's get started with a couple of short stories first. Los Angeles mayor threatens to shut off electricity and water to churches that meet. This continues. I tell you, when you see this, this is from Christian Headlines, July 7, 2020. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti on Wednesday said that he is authorizing the Department of Water and Power to shut off utilities at houses, businesses, and large gatherings within 48 hours that are violating health orders and related COVID-19. All right, so let's stop for just a second. How carefully he worded this. Houses and businesses. Houses means people going to church, the houses of worship. It also means people who are meeting in their homes while churches are shut down. So if you go back into the fine-tuning of what they're doing, is that this focus is making sure that churches do not meet, whether in-house or in church. And he threatened to shut down large gatherings within 48 hours that are violating the health orders. Garcetti's order came following Pastor John MacArthur of Grace Community's interview, saying his congregation would not obey a statewide order to stop meeting. MacArthur delivered a sermon in late July and told the church's members, we must obey God rather than man. The attorney for the council for the church said that Matt Stave on Friday, the Christians in California now have a choice: serve the Lord or have your basic utilities cut off. It's absolutely amazing that you can see the funerals for certain people. There'll be hundreds of people and then miles and miles of people. And the protests can continue all over the country. But if you get together and focus in on certain businesses that keep the community established or church, they're going to come in and threaten to shut you down. And now they're talking about even going into your homes and checking you out. And if they find something that's not appropriate, they will take you out and put you in jail. Sounds like something from pre-World War II Germany, doesn't it? Well, that's the kind of time that we're moving in today. Oh, how about this? Troll dolls. Anybody see this one? This one you're not going to believe either. Here we go, troll dolls. Hasbro is removing troll dolls from stores amid complaints that a button is inappropriately placed. Now take a moment. Every time you look into what's going on to attack our children, new things show up. Somebody deliberately did this at Hasbro and put it out there, and it got by everybody, all right? So here's what this is. When you push a button on the doll's private parts, she gasps and giggles. Now imagine giving that to your daughter, all right? I'll talk to you a little more about this in just a second. We've got a video here. This is how it came to the attention of the public. Play that video.
Okay, I wanted to do a quick video because I find this disturbing and I find it something that needs to be shared. As you all know, stuff that's been going on in the world about the sex trafficking in kids and things that are thrown in our kids' faces to kind of groom them and make them kind of a little bit more oblivious to things that are really happening. So it was my daughter's birthday a couple days ago, and she turned 2, and she was given this gift. It's like a little Poppy doll. It's adorable. And here's the box. So she had a Poppy birthday, and so they gave her this. It's just from the new movie, The Trolls World Tour. On the box, it says Giggle and Sing Poppy. On the back, it says that if you push her tummy right here, sorry, it's glaring. If you push her tummy right here, she makes 10 phrases and sounds. And that's all it talks about, and it comes with a little comb. So, I mean, she does all that. You touch her tummy, and she makes little singing sounds, and she's super cute. Well, I was showing her to my husband, and I heard some other sounds that I had never heard before. And if you look down here, I figured a video was the best way. So I just touched her tummy, and she's gonna sing for a minute. But down here is a button right here on her privates. And if you push those, she makes these sounds. Like a gasping sound. And I know some of you may not think this is a big deal, but especially since I've had kids, this is wrong. For one, this button, it says nothing about this button on the box. Nothing. It's just there. And it makes a gasping sound when you touch her privates. And to me, it's just like sexual sounds, and it's so disturbing. And I got online to see if there had been kind of any complaints. You cannot find this doll on the Walmart website where the people got her. You cannot find this doll on their website anywhere. We even scanned the code. This doll doesn't pull up at all. I just think it's weird. And there's some things where I thought maybe, not that you're naive to the stuff that's going on, but maybe it's never happened to you and you're like, really? Are they really grooming our kids? Sorry.
The problem with this is it introduces children that accepts the point of someone touching a private area as being normal or laughing or expectating. So as they grow up and someone abuses that child, it's not a problem till it's too late. So anyway, it looks like Hasbro has pulled this, but the issue here is that Satan continues to introduce items that affect the future of the children as they're growing up. So I want to bring it to your attention. So if you know people who have children, please share this part of our program with them, make them aware of what's going on. So even when you do your very best to try to protect your children, somehow Satan can sneak in things that are inappropriate and evil for our children. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. Minneapolis, here we go. I didn't want to get into a lot of the violence in our program today because we have a lot of it to cover, but I wanted to share something with you because I saw this video that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes, only about a minute and a half long, because you think about the riots, you think about the protests, and all the things that have taken place. What about the aftermath? What happens in the aftermath of what they call these peaceful protests? So I'm going to take you on what this video was called when I got it, is a Sunday drive in Minneapolis. All right, let's play the video. I think the video might have looped in the recording of it, but what do you think about that, huh? What do you think about the next morning when you wake up and that's your community that you live, or your businesses that you've serviced and frequent in your community? Look what God says in Isaiah. It says, your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, Your land strangers devoured in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. I thought it was interesting how God says, as overthrown by strangers. Because the truth is, other than those who came in that community to actually protest and riot, the rest of the people lived there and did this to their own community. Now, this is going on in many of the major cities around the country. Just this past week, through a false information being brought out in Chicago, of all places, is that it was put out that a black man was assassinated by police officers. Well, opened up a whole new round of protests. What came out, the story was actually false. The person was actually shooting at police and they had to fire back. But now all of a sudden, the city goes into protest. There's been 442 black people killed in Chicago this year. Why isn't there protests when all those children were killed in Chicago? So now they go through and they destroy the main part of their business district downtown, the area they call the Miracle Mile. And so over 100 people were arrested, and they felt like they had the right to do that. It was owed to them. And then the second night, they protested to release the people who were put in jail for looting. It just boggles your mind to think about what's going on here. I sit back and I get startled trying to figure the right words to use, because this is absolutely stupidity what's taking place. And they're getting support and they're getting silence from those who need to speak up and stop this. But it's going on now in Chicago, New York, out west, any of the major cities, Atlanta toward the south, and it's growing. It isn't getting less, it's getting more. And you can expect more to go on until the election's over, in all probability. All right, so now let's move on. So now, to picking up the story again, this time you can't make it up. This is in the protesters. I'm laughing here. I had to stop to tell this. Listen, I had to read this twice when I went into this. The protesters, I want to make sure you get this right. They're suing the city because it's getting too expensive to keep protesting. I'm not making it up. It's getting too expensive because the police aren't playing fair. All right, so they got to buy extra equipment to protect themselves and to be able to combat the police. All right, let's tell you this story. Seattle, rioters sue over the cost-prohibitive gear they need to battle police. I'm not making that up. Could you imagine this a year ago? There's no way. I mean, I'm looking at our crew here. How about you guys? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You know, this is not fair. These policemen, they got more equipment, they got more guns, they got more ammunition, they got armament they're wearing. We need the same thing if we're going to keep this battle going. It gets better. Wait, there's another one at the end of this. The lawsuit has been filed by the Seattle activists who allege they are unconstitutionally forced into sanctions in which they need expensive gear to battle police. That's unconstitutional. We shouldn't have to buy expensive gear. They contend the Seattle Police Department has acted above and outside of the law, dispersing its unbridled force, and the city has failed to prevent the same. So now the government, in effect, is to establish a de facto protest tax. Did you get that? So now, in the lawsuit, because they can't afford to buy the gear they need to fight the police, they want the government to establish a tax for the protests so that they can give it to the protesters to fight the police who are trying to stop the protests. You can't make that up. This is true. You need to wonder the judge who accepted the case. Some things is just frivolous lawsuits, and they said, no, we're not taking that. That's a frivolous lawsuit. It goes on. Now, these are quotes. Only those who have the means to purchase expensive protective gear can engage in First Amendment speech in the streets of Seattle, they insist. Most protest goers don't have the equipment they need. to safely withstand the force utilized by the SPD while on the streets exercising their First Amendment rights. So, heck, let's just raise the money and just give it to them so they can keep their protests going. This is unbelievable what's going on here. In Minneapolis, they raised $34 million. Let me say that again. $34 million to pay the bail to get all the protesters out of jail so they can go back and protest the next night. They had $34 million in donations came in for that purpose. Where is the nation going to? So we'll talk a little more about that next week as we see what unveils this week. But I just wanted to show you the nonsense, how crazy it is. You know, God says that he's going to take the wisdom and the wise from our nation. In the same book, Isaiah, what we're reading from, it says the whole head is sick. And you can see it, what's going on right now. All right, so now, let's get into a focus. This began last week, and this is very important that we understand in light of what's coming up in the elections this coming year. Last week, we introduced that Joe Biden was on line with the Muslim nation, saying that if he gets elected, he's going to begin teaching more of the Muslim faith in schools. Now, we know that they're fighting all the time to keep Christ out, separation of church and state, but now you're going to bring the Muslim faith in. At the same time, we know the Bible says, don't learn about the heathen. But here we are as a nation now. Now we're bringing in is a carrot to bring in the Muslim people. They're trying to bring in 1 million people who will vote for Biden to get him in so that they can continue to expand their influence in our nation. Now, this is what I call opening the door to the Muslim influence at the government cabinet level. So that's where we're at right now. We began talking about this back in January of 2019, showing you how first the Muslim culture had an infiltration we talked about last week. We showed that the economy has a major role in this influence, and that when it happens, there will be continued growing lawlessness at that time. Well, you're here. We are here right now, and that's what we began talking about last week. So then this week, I went back even earlier in our News Nuggets and Insights, all the way back to August 31st, 2018. Right? So that's now almost 2 full years ago, where we began focus on the Middle East. And back then, if you can go online, by the way, go to the website, go to the God's Unchanging Word website. There's a category, it says categories, it'll drop a box down. All of the NNI, all the way back to, I believe, 2017 and 16, most every one of those are there, but I know for the last 3 years, every NNI program is there, and you can go back and find it. You can go back to this one, and in that program, what we began to introduce is that what's going on in Europe, we said, will eventually come to America. Well, we're here. I didn't realize I was going to give it that quick, but it is here now, just 2 years later. This is back, we talked about the public domination, showing how the domination was growing in Europe. Back then, we talked about the stages of infiltration. We also had a sermon back then, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. And we're showing you that eventually what it was going to was where France was already at, was Shia-controlled France. That in certain areas in France, it was under Shia law, no longer under the law of France in those communities. And there were police no-go zones. The police were not allowed to go into those zones. They were going to take care of themselves according to Shia law. And we said that eventually these phases will gradually come into the United States, and we're at that phase right now. You can also see the spiritual intent of it in the sermon we had, The Spiritual Sojourner, which talked about Deuteronomy 28, verse 43, which says, the sojourner or the stranger who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall be brought lower and lower. So now we're beginning to see that now, and it's being brought into the cabinet level is the Muslim people saying that you're going to have a part of my administration. We're at the stage now is that what you're looking at is emerging of socialism, communism, the anarchy, and now even the Muslim influence and the Marxist influence in the BLMs, showing all of this together to stop the protection of the Christian on the right. All of these things are merging together, and God says that was going to happen at the end of days. We're there. We are absolutely there, and you're looking at the foothold beginning to take place right now, right before our very eyes. So now, what I want to do now is I'm going to go through the 5 phases of Muslim influence and how it affects people. Okay, you ready? Let's go through this. First, the incubation phase is that when it first arrives in Western democracy, it keeps a low profile and make very few, if any, demands on the host nation. Quietly work as shopkeepers, students, teachers, doctors, and other professionals, making a good impression, a good first impression, and gaining vocal or vocational respect. Right, that's the first. And when people say, "Well, it's really nice to work with the Muslim people coming in from these other countries, and we all get along just fine," you do. At the very beginning, it always works that way. This is like their manifesto. I'm not making this up. This is their own documentation. 2, you reach a recognition stage. That is when you have a sufficient number of Muslims gather, request recognition of the Sharia law being applied within their own community. All right? So now, they say, okay, we got enough of us here, and say, well, we have a hard time adapting to the U.S. Constitution. So what we'd like to do is be able to operate just in our own community, not going to affect anybody else, just in our own little community. First of all, why are they not merging in with the rest of the nation? Right? They don't. It always separates. And so within our own community, then preempt resistance and suspicions, publicly condemn radical Islam. Right, here we are. While we're asking for recognition and we're being peaceful, we are also condemning the radical Islam at the same time. So you must say, well, that can't be wrong here because they're condemning their own radical Islam. We gave a sermon back, it was almost 7 years ago now, and I'm going to go back and see if I can find what we had in there. If not, I'm going to redo it. It's all the way back from 1948 to 1952, when Israel became a state and the war began between Israel and the Muslim nations. They realized and began to change that the way to overcome wasn't just through radical Islam, it's through peaceful means and radical. And they began to establish that means all the way back as early as 1952. And that's what they're using right now around the rest of the world. So they're going to publicly condemn radical Islam, even well-publicized interfaith dialogue gatherings. Now, you know that they are not in favor of getting along with Christians. In fact, the whole goal here is to destroy all Christians. They call them the infidels. But at the same time, at the beginning, it's okay to lie about all of this, as long as you're growing in your stages to be able to take over the dominance. Position Islam as a religion of peace. All right, whose Shia law isn't a threat to the host nation. That's what it says. We're just going to keep it amongst our own community. It's not going to bother anybody else, since it would never be applied outside the Muslim community. 3, infiltration. Gain critical mass in a few cities. Now, we're already at this stage here in America. You see it in Michigan and Tennessee, and some other cities around the country now are growing just as strong as some of these. I believe Minnesota is another community. Begin to infiltrate key institutions of the host society. Create an alphabet soup of front umbrella organizations that inflate their size. So you have a whole pile of different businesses that are around. And maybe 1 or 2 different people. But in the voting realm, in the voting box, it makes them look like they have a lot of power and influence. Use the lobby of the government to support the pro-Muslim political candidates. We've seen that beginning in 2018. You began to have the Muslim candidates brought into Congress and began to, in fact, when they took their oath of office, it wasn't on the Bible, it was on the Quran. You probably remember that. That was only 2 years ago. Use the lobbying government to bring in the candidates, conduct the public relation campaigns, file lawsuits against alleged Islamophobia. So now they get power and influence, and they're accepted as a community. They have a community base. They look like they're larger than they really are. And so the people in government say we can't offend them because we're going to lose the vote. That's what's going on. They're going to lose the vote. So now, if you raise your voice against Islam, thou shalt have no other God before me, that's a voice against Islam. You don't have to go out there and preach anti-Muslim. You only need to present Jesus Christ, and you have offended the Muslim people. Because the Muslims will not deal with infidels. So now you're being charged with Islamophobia. Place imams as chaplains in armed forces, they have done that. And in prisons, they have done that. And endow Islamic study departments at universities, they're doing that right now. Now we're talking about, from President Biden, bringing it from the university level all the way into the grammar school with the littlest of kids. All right? Pressure public schools with Muslim students to pray towards Mecca. You can't have a prayer in school with Jesus Christ, but you have to allow time for the Muslims to be able to pray toward Mecca so many times a day. 4, the confrontation. Now we begin the confrontation stage. When Muslims become a significant minority in the host country, you see what it said there, a significant minority. It didn't say they had to control everything, but they had to have just enough people that is going to threaten and lose the vote, that people's going to give in to their demands. Why? Because, well, really, they're just over there on their own. They're not hurting anybody. I mean, I know it's Shia law that they're going by. You know, in some cities now, they have their own police force. They do. They do. And demand incorporating into its legal system elements of the Sharia law. And that's what they're doing now. We're already at stage 4. This demand is made while rogue elements of the Muslim community threaten and engage in violence. But we have seen that violence decreasing in America since President Trump took over. Once you see the conservative issue power base out, you will see that rise up again. And already with Joe Biden saying if he's elected, he will bring it in. And when there's nothing to stop it, it will grow. And you've seen it around the country, and it's been that way for centuries. 5, imposition. When the Muslim population becomes the majority and or the Islam gains control of a region, impose Sharia law across the region. All right, so now that they have the control, they have the voting bloc, and they can change the laws. In certain cities, that's beginning to move right now. In certain areas, very small, but in certain areas of the country now, right now, in communities in some of the largest cities up north, you're beginning to see this influence begin to take place. All right, when they gain control of a region, impose Sharia law across the region, lock down against non-Islamic influences, including the gospel. So if there's a gospel that's an influencing the Islam that's a problem, get rid of it. The ideal Islamic state is Saudi Arabia, where Sharia law is the only official law and is enforced with barbaric brutality. That's in Saudi Arabia. This is the eventual goal. So on the left, this is from Gatestone, I'm going to go through all of that. While they condemn Israel for being a state, they have created, look at the sign, only for Muslims going to Mecca. And in some countries, they will not allow any other faith. Christianity cannot exist. They have burnt down many churches. They have removed Christians. They have been, for the last couple of decades now, beheading Christians. And you're seeing this continue to go on around the world. The eventual goal in a 5-stage process is right here. Now, 2 years ago, we told you it was coming to America, and some people laughed and said that can never happen. Well, you are there now, and in some areas it's gone as far as Category 5, and we're beginning to open the door for that final phase to go in across the nation. So I wanted to bring that to you because this is really, really important as we go through this. All right, the next one, the last focus here before we get into the nuggets portion is follow the money. If you want to know what's going on, just follow the money. Governments and investors alike are beginning to add to their precious metals. Everybody sees that's what's going on around the world. The economies are sinking, and the only reason they're not sinking in many countries is because they're going on increasing debt. They just pour in trillions and trillions of dollars to keep the economy going. What's crazy here in America is that they keep saying we need to have more money, more taxes, but we need to shut down more businesses. And you can't have it both ways. So now, in the past week, we've watched silver now begin to soar like it did just a few years ago. So now, here's a chart from June 2019 that we brought up. This is on the precious silver in April. This is the exact same chart I brought out in June of 2019, a year ago. That in 2011, at the height of the recession, silver hit $55.21. By 2018, when things stabilized, silver was back down to $14.32. Now, this is where we began to bring it to your attention, telling you that it looked like silver is stabilized and is low enough that you might want to use some of this silver as a hedge against what's coming down the road, all right? What's coming down. In June 2019, now this is 1 year later, it was at $14.74. So you see, for about a year, it was pretty stable. Go up a little bit, come down a little bit. But when things happen and stress is put on the Dow, the stock markets, and around the world, people begin moving money into the precious metals because that's the protective hedge of where things are going. Now, in 2008, this was at the beginning of the recession with the economy. In February, this began to move the silver up $24.01. You can see how fast it went. By October, they told you everything is fine. We got everything under control. Silver came down again. Everybody moves their money back into stocks. The Fed said they had everything fixed. When they talked about the problem with the economy, with the mortgages, they said it's all fixed. There's no banking problems. We got it all under control. At the Feast of Tabernacles, I went to the feast sites we had back then, and I told everyone they're lying to us. And we had a sermon that we called The Coming Economic Collapse. Well, just a couple months later, it actually began to collapse. So now, here we are today. All right, so what are we looking at today? Today, with the average price of silver, which I'll show you in just a second, the price of silver with an average of 15, it was actually a little below 15, that it was easily could go up 4 times. So what we began to say about 6 months to a year ago is that if you had anything that you could invest, if you want to protect yourself, and I'm telling you this from a personal perspective, not as a stockbroker. I have no licenses. I have no legal authority to get into your life and tell you what to do. But when you understand the biblical principles of what's taking place and how the economies, and you follow the money, you know obviously that when things happen, gold and silver is going to rise. And I use silver because most of us don't have enough money to buy gold. All right, some people do, and if you can, get into the gold. But if you got silver, this is a way to hedge some of your bets. Suppose you put in $5,000 into silver under $15 and it goes to 60. Well, then you get 4,000. 4 times you can pick up $20,000. You make a $15,000 increase, and you can use that to help cover expenses and bills. None of this is going to give you your protection through 3.5 years of captivity, all right, in the tribulation that's coming. But it will buy you some time. And God tells us we need to be doing something to prepare. We see that example from Joseph. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you a way, and I'm going to give you a couple examples now of how this can help you in the upcoming crisis that's going to be taking place. All right, one example, this was in June, is how fast prices can move with economic disruptions. This is just one time last year when we first introduced this. Let me show you this. On Tuesday, June 18th, the price of silver was $14.83. 2 days later, Iran shoots down an American drone. The price had jumped to $15.55 on that same day. All right, so when things settled down, it went down to $15.42. So you see that just one thing began to move it really quick right back then. Now, silver spot prices in 2019. Labor Day kicked off the tariffs. Now, tariffs was a lot bigger than just shooting down a drone. This was fighting against China and some of the other nations. September 4th, 2019, silver now had gotten up to $19.57. So you can see if you got in under 15, you could turn around and make 25% in just a matter of just a couple months, even back then. June 14, 2019, $14.83. So you begin to see the difference by just one action that can influence the rest of the world. And people get nervous. They with money, they do a lot of things. You begin to see the stock market moving. They move everything into precious metals. In that short 11-week period, silver rose 32%. And that's just on a fear of what might happen, right? That's just the fear of what might happen. September 9, 2019, it dropped to $18.05, but it still was way up there in just a matter of no time at all. Now let's look at 2020. All right, 2020, this is the chart on the 1-year silver prices. You see that little box in the middle right here? Look at the price of silver with the economy of what's been taking place right now. The problem here is that the United States said, well, we don't know if we're going to be able to give you more money or not. So now everybody's getting nervous. While the government was taking it on the heels and increasing debt by the trillions of dollars, the stock market knew that they were still pretty safe because there's money being poured into the economy. But now then, as we got closer and closer to the government saying, well, we don't know if we're going to get this passed to put any more money out there, now people says, okay, we can't sustain where we're at. So now they begin to move money into precious metals, right, into the precious metals. On March 22nd, 2020, at the beginning of this economy collapse because of COVID, the price of silver got as low as $11.94. Now, the reason for that was that nobody was buying and building anything. There was no need for silver, which gives you a type of a warning at the end time before price returns, where they said they're going to be throwing the silver in the streets, because there'll be no use for it, showing you what can happen on the opposite side of the coin. August 7th, 2020, this was just this past Friday, the price had already risen to $28.43. On Monday, it went to $29.23. I think it had an intraday high of $29.40. What you're looking at right here is the third time or the third highest silver has ever gotten into and recorded in the last 100 years. And that's only on the fear of what might be coming if they don't get money into the economy to keep it going. But you see how fast it went? So if you'd have got in back last year when we said in June and got out now, you could have doubled your money, just that fast. But that's just the beginning when the economy is going to get worse. This is a chart from 1975, and you see with the little star on the right, that's where we are. All right, this was the first. This was back in the economies where we were going. Inflation there was 18%, and houses were like 12% interest rate. So people moved money into silver, and again, and that's 2008 to 2011. You've seen how the price of silver there. So now, this was August 10th, 2020, showing where we are today, and you can see how fast. Look at that red line right there. We can pull that back up, Jeff. Look how fast it went up in just a matter of a couple days. In fact, I told Audrey on Monday, I said we could take and get rid of our silver now because it's going to come right back down again sooner or later until the time hits. I said, take our profits, set aside. When the silver drops again, we'll go buy again. Well, we didn't do it. We just sat back and watched and looked at today, and it's dropping. So anyway, you're in for the long haul. You're not in for day trading. But anyway, this is a means by which you can help protect yourself. It also is a hedge against inflation. As everything else goes up, you increase the value. It's a hedge against the dollar losing its value. Of all this, all going on all at the same time. This is only the third time in recorded history that silver has reached these levels of where we are today. All right, gold storing expands. Russia and China is still stockpiling gold and silver, particularly Russia and China boosting their gold reserves at a very rapid pace. The trend is projected to continue due to trade tensions and market uncertainty. So now, let's pick up the biblical side of this as we come back after this little short commercial and what we're going to call gold and silver, and we're going to talk in just a few minutes right after the short video called Faith. We'll be right back. Welcome back. That's a powerful little video. It's amazing how much story you can tell in just about a minute and a half to 2 minutes. Great, great little video. All right, let's talk about silver and gold. Ezekiel 7, verse 19. God says, they shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. I thought it appropriate, since I spent so much time talking about silver and using that as a way of hedge and helping you during some difficult times, to keep us focused that that's not going to save you. Right? We need to remember, that's not going to save you. At some point in time, the silver is going to be worthless. That's simply bringing you to a stage in time to help you in an economic downturn when the silver goes up, that you can unload that silver, and they'll still be buyers for a while, quite a while. And that it'll get you through if you don't have a job or you need to make payments on a house or something to keep you going for just a little longer. That's just one hedge. And we're going to talk more about different hedges that's going to help you during the 7 years of lean in type at the end time, just like it was with Joseph, with the children of Israel as we go. All right, going on. And their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. It shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels, because it is the stumbling block of their iniquity. If you have a love of these physical things, if you think that you're going to put enough gold and silver and platinum and palladium aside, then you're going to be terribly, terribly disappointed at the end time, because that's not going to save you. Only Jesus Christ can. It will become worthless. Look at the book of Daniel. Daniel tells us about this. At the end time, the king of the south shall push at him, talking about the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. And with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, he shall enter the countries and shall overflow and pass over, and he shall stretch forth his hands upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have the power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. So here we see the struggle at the end time of the power of the king of the north and the king of the south. And when you see this, you know you're getting to the end time. And it says that that king is going to have power over the silver and the gold in the world. Right? So that's what we're looking at before the end of this age. So I brought this out just a year ago or 2 years ago. So I thought if you didn't see this program, you might find it interesting. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland and removed their gold. So this is from the 2016 headlines. It says 2 Polish army officers who saved 75 tons of gold from being seized by the enemy forces in World War II were on Saturday buried at Warsaw Cemetery. Now, these men, in fact, there's a movie out how they was able to hide the gold, put it on a train, and ship it out so that the Germans couldn't get it, with 75 tons of gold at that time. So in 1939, the year Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany and Soviet Union, and 2 officers carried out a successful operation to save gold from the Polish central bank so that they didn't fall into the Germans' hands at the time. Well, now they were moving it back to Poland from London at that time. It says, like a page taken out of a spy novel, 4 trucks pulled out of a secret facility somewhere in London. While the city slept, the police escort, ground and air, joined in heavy trucks with lights flashing to clear the road as a helicopter whirled above, and the passengers receiving this high security entourage, 20 large wooden crates filled with solid gold bars. It was on its way back to Poland, right? Back to Poland. Poland repatriates 100 tons of gold from the Bank of England storage. And there what you're seeing is all the gold that was brought to the airplane, and they're loading it on the airplane, bringing it back to Poland. So in addition to the move, the institution bought about 126 tons in 2018 and 2019 to increase its gold reserves to 228.6 tons of gold. And as a result, the country has become the 22nd largest bullion holder in the world and has the biggest reserves of the metal in the European Union's east, the central bank said. So they were protecting themselves, and so as times and economies were getting tight, they began pulling back their gold and increasing their volume to give them more stability in the uncertain times that came ahead. So I thought that was an interesting story, so I wanted to bring that out to you again, because God says that the gold is going to be removed, and it is being removed. The governments around the world continue to add to their arsenal of reserve, while the rest of the world just goes about dillying around like they have the rest of eternity to fool around this nonsense that we're going through today. All right, that's our program. Let's get from the home office and begin to wrap it up. In the mail this week, Through the Eyes of God by our Chuck Hunt Jr. from Michigan, the Michigan minister up there, and part 2 in the sermon series I'm actually working on the Edge of Eternity, part 2. God willing, I'm going to finish that series this Saturday. Tomorrow, when you see this program, it will be Saturday, unless we have to be out of town with uncertainty of a possible funeral coming up, which I won't actually get into now. I'll tell about that later. But if I'm here and still in New Orleans this Saturday, then we will be doing part 4 to finalize this series. Also in the mail last week was our quarterly, the magazine. So if you haven't gotten your quarterly magazine or you're not on the mailing list, give us a call. Write in or send us a card. We'll be glad to put you on the mailing list. And every month, we send you a newsletter, what's going on in the work and around the world. And we also offer a card. And in that card gives you a free offering of a sermon for that month. All right. This month, when we sit with this, we thought it was appropriate with all the removing of statues and tearing down of our history, is that this was given about 7 years ago. It's called America Pathway to Freedom, talking about the Founding Fathers Monument. And if you haven't seen that sermon, take a look. Write in, get you a copy. It's a powerful little story about that monument that was built right here in America. Feast updates, we are still go for all of our feast sites. The biggest problem we have is Kalamazoo. The governor has limited to 10 people for inside activities. Now, she just put out a news release this week that they're going to make another decision by September 4th whether they're going to maintain that 10-person limit or not. So we're going to be making a call right after that whether we can stay in Michigan. If not, then we're going to be moving down to Syracuse, Indiana, to the church building we own down in Syracuse, just a few hours south of there. So in the meantime, we recommend get in touch with Chuck Hunt. There's his phone number and his email, and get the information on the hotels that he is establishing down in Syracuse in case you needed to make your reservation. All right, so everywhere else is still on. We are limited in Florida as to how many people we have, so we're going to mail out a letter in the next week asking if you can help us where you plan to attend so that we can begin getting a registration so we have an idea of numbers. We've been getting a lot of calls from people in their churches who have just shut the feast site down. They can't meet. And they want to know if they can meet with us. And of course, you can meet with us. But we just need to know the numbers to make sure that we have enough to accommodate everybody. So we're going to put that letter out this coming week. So be on the lookout for it. And if you can help us in advance, give us a call, let us know. Write in on an email or send back the little letter that we're going to be sending out. Just give us help to plan properly for this year's feast. Well, there you have it. That's our program for today. We're going to close as we always do with a very upbeat. Now, by the way, this video here, Audrey outdid herself for finding this video. It says, we celebrate our graduates. And I said, well, do we really want to send that now because graduation is kind of over? But we never really did anything for the graduates, and some are still graduating because of the COVID. But when I looked at this video, this is for everybody. So this is celebrating you and I and our calling even for God. It's a very powerful, upbeat video. Take a look, and I'll be right back. Wasn't that a powerful little video? I mean, when you read all those little quotes and what they say, I mean, every one of them is built with principles founded in God's holy word. And I was looking at it for the first time as I went through it. It's like, well, you know, you and I we're here. We're going through training. This is an education that we're going through with God's church. Our graduation is when Jesus Christ returns back to this earth. So we pray that every one of you will hold fast to the very end, so that when we go to graduation, Jesus Christ will be there, and we'll be there to meet him when he returns on this earth. Well, that's it for our program. Thanks again for watching. Well, we hope that you'll continue to help us to get the word out, and we know you are, because we continue to receive every week new names and information and people requesting things. And I come here every day and I look at the mail come through with names I don't recognize. It's a powerful and exciting time that we live in today. It's also a very detrimental, painful time that we're going to go through. But with Jesus Christ, we'll get it through it together. And as Jesus tells us at the very end, he says, when you see these things happening, lift your head high and know that salvation draws near. So remember now, as we bring this to a close, tell everybody you know. They're going to love you for taking this information and sharing it with them. Or not. Till next week, God be with you.